Well, this has been a long time coming. Hey guys, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. My name is Claire Holliday, and I am a fantasy author aspiring for traditional publishing that likes to talk fantasy books in the meantime. And if you have been around my channel for a minute, then you know I am a huge First Law Trilogy fan, Joe Abercrombie fan, The Blade itself fan, huge fan. And I remember when I read that trilogy being like, wow, this was genuinely one of the most game changing, life changing books and series that I ever read, especially as an aspiring fantasy author myself, where I was like, okay, this is the kind of writing that I really like because it's just so entertaining, clear, and smart. And it treats the readership with such respect and trusting that they are intelligent adults that want to be told a story. We can pick up what you're putting down, even if it's complicated. I don't know why it took me so long to get to A Little Hatred. Other books got in the way. And I think, honestly, I forgot how good Joe Abercrombie is. I think that's simply what it came down to. And then I listened to A Little Hatred, and I have had a slew of bad to mediocre reads the last year or two. And this was like drinking water for the first time in 8 hours, and it's 100 degrees out. We're like, wow, there might not be anything better than this. And I genuinely wonder, I'm like, is there a better book than this out there? Now, obviously, this is just the first book, so I think my feelings are bound to change and morph as I read books 2 and 3. But at least for book one, blown away. Honestly, I like it better than The Blade itself, which I didn't think was possible. And I think that's part of what kept me from reaching for it for so long, was because knowing that it was a sequel series, I was just like, well, what characters could be better than the people I got to know in The Blade itself? What story could be more entertaining? And I will never doubt Joe Abercrombie again. I think a huge part of it, frankly, is that a good portion of the cast was female, and they were women that I could kind of relate to. You know, you had the highly feminine, intelligent, manipulative entrepreneur Savine Dan Glockta, who I love and might be one of my favorite characters of all time. But then you also have the wild, weird, unruly, rebellious, psychic northern daughter of the dog man. Even just between those two characters, I had so much more to latch on to than I think in the previous trilogy. So what I'm going to do is break it down character by character, what I really liked. I'm trying to think if there's anything I didn't like in regards to this book. You know what? There might be a few, so we'll get there when we get there. But if you've never read Joe Abercrombie, then you should listen to The Blade itself. I also listened to this, read by Stephen Pacey, just one of the absolute best narrators out there. I wish he could just read everything. And it's crazy how good he is at the voices, including the female voices, and differentiating between them all, which is obviously one of the best skills that Joe Abercrombie has, is that each character is so distinctive in the way they talk, the actions they take, the thought processes that they have, that he does not need to tell you which POV he's transitioning to. Even if he transitions between several different characters per chapter, I don't need to be explicitly told. I can figure it out because they're just that distinctive and descriptive. And it's never purple prose. There's some actual beautiful descriptions in here. It's not as if it lacks description. He's just such a wildly entertaining writer. He knows exactly how long to stay in a scene, where maybe someone without that same instinct would linger way too long until it gets boring and people lose interest, but he just knows exactly how long to stay. Why we're in this scene, like, it felt like every scene, every chapter, every interaction, there was a purpose to it. It was not gratuitous, nor was it accidental. He's extremely good with action, and I will say something that I personally really liked with this book over the Blade itself trilogy. The Blade itself, it focused so much on war and personal combat. Still wildly entertaining, still done in a way where it's easy to follow what's happening. Sometimes action, especially combat, can be really tough to parse out, but in The Blade itself, super easy. This did not have a ton of that sort of action. I did feel like Joe Abercrombie was challenging himself. I feel like he went, I'm going to include more female POVs, younger female POVs, but people that are like wildly different from each other with completely opposite personalities, and not just Savine and Ririk, but like the other female characters. And they're all wildly different from each other. I feel like he challenged himself by kind of pulling back on the combat. Like there was a little bit of it, but there was a different sort of violence and darkness and tension that was building. And when that tension exploded, it was riveting. It was heart racing. And it was just such a clear, spectacular movie in my mind. But that was also really stressful and like insane. But yeah, if you have not read Joe Abercrombie, I would say for the majority of A Little Hatred, it felt like its own thing. You did not need to read the first Law trilogy to understand this new trilogy until I got towards the end. And then I was like, well, you know what? Actually, I think you do. I don't think you'll understand why the final scene has so much weight and is so scary unless you have read the first trilogy. All right, so enough of that. So blah, 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 spoilers ahead. So first we got Ririk. Ririk. It definitely does not look the way it sounded, so I'm kind of having trouble with pronunciation, but she is one of my favorite characters ever. It's the kind of thing where if enough people knew who these characters were, I would be Ririk for Halloween because she has such a cool design with like the blue tattoo thing over her eye and her piercings and all her like weird necklaces and crazy hair. She's so entertaining. Obviously being the Dogman's daughter too. When we got to that point, I was like, Dogman's daughter? And then the Dogman just being kind of this like sweet, gentle father that's like, actually, you don't want the life I live. You should do everything in your power to avoid repeating my mistakes and living through the type of life that I had to live to, which is very First Law trilogy-esque. But Ririk being one, hilarious. She is so funny. I mean, she's one of, I think she might be the first POV we're introduced to. And she just stays hilarious every time she came on screen, you know what I mean? She's just full of wit and humor and the kind where it's like she's a little gross, a little dirty, a little obviously uncivilized, unpolished, but it's so raw and real and genuine. Love her flirtation and getting together with Leo Dan Brock and their little tits for tats. And then obviously her going to the big city and being just so blown away by what was going on there and overwhelmed. So I think the biggest question mark in regards to her character is she going to heed her father's advice, the Dogman's advice, and try not to repeat the sins of the past and listen to him in regards to revenge and not seek it out? Or is her wildness and sometimes her inability to control her emotions going to take the best of her and she is going to enact her revenge, whether she should or shouldn't, and be cruel potentially to Leo and kind of go against her father's? I can see it going both ways. It could be a situation where she fucks up and she enacts revenge, and then only because she's able to like really witness the consequences of her actions that she's like, oh wait, this is what my father was trying to warn me against, and now I'm going to get a bunch of people killed, or I'm going to cause harm to the North and my clan and my people, that she like tries to be wiser and a little bit more cool-headed. That's just something I could see happen, but that's just a prediction. I certainly don't know. But Joe Abercrombie's really good at laying that groundwork for that believable growth, or lack of growth, the reverse of growth. And I think that's something that will be really interesting with this trilogy, because the First Law trilogy, and I kind of talk about it in my reviews from forever ago, that it was kind of ultimately nihilistic, how people seemed to change. There seemed to be character growth and personal change for the better, but ultimately people could not resist the cycles that they were in. and their bad habits and bad decisions would just overtake them, and it was like a wheel, a very sad, negative, nihilistic wheel that everybody was stuck running in and nobody could escape from. I will be curious to see if there's that same tone with this trilogy, or if there will be a little bit more hopefulness that characters do have the ability to change. And I guess I'm already seeing that a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and jump to her character in Savine Dan Glockta. She might be my favorite character ever, like of all time. I love Savine so much. She's so cool. She's like everything I would ever want to be. So witty, so elegant, so smart, conniving, manipulative. She's Glockta's daughter. Oh my gosh. Like, do I talk about that now or do I talk about that later? I'll talk about it now. The twist. I did not see coming. I did not at all see the twist of her and Orso being siblings. That was such an unbelievable Oedipus Rex gut punch. Like, oh my God. I remember where I was when I heard it. I think I was walking my dog, so I just stopped in my tracks and I was like, what? No. So happy for her and Orso. And after what she had been through with the city going to shit and her almost dying, living through hell, being saved by Orso, who finally put himself out there because he loved her so much, and then finding out they're half siblings. Now, does that mean they're not going to get together in the end? I don't know. Is he gonna go the George R. Martin route and just kind of be like, this is fantasy, this is fiction, people can be freaks, a little fictional incest never hurt anybody? Or is it going to be this genuinely impossible bridge for them to cross, like how it would be in the real world? But this isn't the real world. And it's hard because I'm like, well, I kind of want them to get together because they were so sweet to each other. And when he saved her was really sweet. I don't know. It's so heartbreaking. It's just really tragic. It's just like that, again, that Oedipus Rex, horrible meta tragedy that there's really not a good solution for. But anyway, so beyond her being hilarious, I loved the way she moved through high society, but was also vicious, sharp. It was so fun to see the mind of Glockta, but in a beautiful woman, and how, Glockta's been able to use fear to maneuver and gain power in society pretty effectively, but also it's grotesque and scary. Where Savine, she's able to be elegant. People are attracted to her. She's also one of the richest people in this world. So she has wealth, she has her brains, she has her beauty, and she's able to use all these different tools, much in the same way that Glockta uses tools of torture to get information out of people. She uses her tools of intellect and beauty to kind of coerce information out of people. And at least for the first half of the book, what happens to her when the city goes to shit and the rebels take over, that week of madness was so riveting. And being in her position and knowing the kind of life that she's used to, the way she expects to be taken care of, and all of that being stripped from her violently, forcefully. And she just has to figure it out. And she constantly almost dies, almost starves, and she looks like a haggard, beaten, lowly woman. It's so brilliantly executed. It made me, this is going to sound really dramatic, it made me so happy to exist in this point of time where I can listen to this incredible narrator, read this incredible author's work, and just be this blown away by it. That scene of chaos and destruction with the jester woman, the judge. And she's very much reminds me, if the Joker took over and actually had power, that's what the judge reminds me of. But she's also just a very particular, sinister, distinctive female character. And then just all these other these like beggars that get to kind of be king for a day and treat people with so much cruelty and animosity. And of course, there's the commentary of people like Savine that have such wealth. They're employing people, but in horrible conditions, paying them virtually nothing. And of course, it's not surprising that eventually this sort of rebellion happens. But once it does happen, it's not as if the most moral person takes over and everything and everybody gets paid equal wages and has food and can live in safe, clean homes with their families. No, it's chaos. And most of the time, people seek revenge and they just want to make the people that enacted decades of cruelty towards them feel the way that they've felt. And it's just shocking, but not shocking. It's completely in line with human nature, but it's grotesque. I also really love the way that her and Ririk's interaction when they're at the ball together was really sweet. These two women, because they're so different from each other, would hate each other, right? And it would be this, you're bad, no, you're bad, like a cattiness. And instead, they're so sweet and they're so kind. And they kind of see how the other has just been through a lot and they admire each other for different reasons. And it's really nice. And it's like really, really sweet. I like that I never quite know how characters are going to interact. And sometimes it's for the worse and they're more sinister than I expect. And it's kind of nice when sometimes they're like actually sweeter and kinder than I expect. It's one of those moments that did make me like this book more than the Blade itself. Throughout that entire series, there is a strong undercurrent of nihilism and just kind of almost like skepticism of the ability for people to actually act morally. And little snippets like this of Savine and Ririk being very kind to each other, meeting each other for the first time and having such a genuine exchange where they exchange their necklaces and it means so much to either of them. It's very touching and it's small and there's obviously so much brutality and chaos in the rest of the book, but it was something that really left an impression on me. Okay, well, I kind of talked about Orso a little bit. So Crown Prince Orso is also hilarious, but he's funny in a way that's different from Ririk. The first chapter that he was introduced with, it's just written in such a hilarious way, even though he's pathetic and he's kind of shameful, not really a good person, but he's genuine and dopey and self-deprecating. There wasn't necessarily a complex plot or series of events with him, but I very much enjoyed every time we were in his POV, him falling in love and declaring his loyalty to Savine and that he was going to make her queen after saving her was very sweet. And then obviously the way that was ripped out from under him. And he still doesn't know about the whole sibling thing. So he's just really sad. He doesn't have an ego. He's aware of kind of what a loser he is. And same with Ririk after they sleep together. She's like, oh, he's just kind of a good guy, just dopey and lost and just should not by any stretch of the imagination have the ability or the access to this much power and wealth. So that's how he was for this book. Very, very interested to see what will happen to him in book 2, because he kind of had the biggest plot twist of them all with his dad suddenly dying. And I almost said Bezos. It's not Bezos, who's Baez looming in at the end and being scary and creepy and weird. It's definitely an indication that Orso is going to have a lot of change happen to him in the second book. Had some, but not a ton in this first one. I would say it more just established his character and just kind of how unfit he is to rule. And even when he has opportunities to enact power, and even if he thinks he enacted power and did the right thing, he realizes actually he has no power at all because people were hung that he did not ask to be hung and they were done anyway. And there was just nothing he could do to stop it. And so I think him now being king and having Baez loom over his shoulder is going to be very stressful. And he's not the type of character that can handle that sort of stress. So now we're on to Vic Dan Tufel. I can't remember how it was pronounced in the book, but Vic, I remember Vic. She was not my favorite POV to be in, but we weren't with her very often, and I understood the necessity of her POV. I think I thought in the first third of the book that she was going to be much more consistent than she ended up being, and I think that was for the best because she's a lot more one note than someone like Savine or Ririk, but she's necessary because she's our inside guy, right? We're able to see a larger scope of the puzzle because she's working for Glockta and she's a spy. Because we have her POV, we can see the coordination of the chaos that led to the downfall of the city that Savine was visiting. She was a necessary character, very sad, tragic character. I'm not that committed or overly interested in where she's going in the next few books. I think because she just seems so one note. Though my one interesting prediction, I think there could be a setup of her doing something very, very brave and not for her self-interest, possibly against Glockta. Maybe she kills Glockta. I'm just gonna put my little predictions out there. There's kind of that setup because she just has to be so selfish for survival, not for status, not for money, not for happiness, but just to survive because that has been so well established, especially in this first book, getting played around with and flipped on its head in a later book. And that's what I got for Vic. Gunnar Broad. Gunnar Broad, another, I wouldn't say super complex character, but also necessary character to see the man on the ground for the rebellion and I don't even want to say blue collar workers, but just used and abused workers. Obviously, he has a little bit of that Nine Fingers mysterious backstory that you can tell has a lot of violence in it. Loved the relationship that he had with his wife and daughter. Shout outs to his daughter for being so clever and getting them to a point of safety. He's someone that could be, now that he seems to be with Savine more often, like they're going to be kind of paired up together in situations moving forward, that could lead itself to some interesting dynamics and conversations and situations. He wasn't my favorite POV, but his scenes were quick and poignant and always had a purpose to them. But the one scene where I was like, oh, was when he was working in the factory and he knew children were also working in the factory. And it's like already just horrible, disgusting, brutal conditions. And a child falls in or gets crushed and then eventually falls into this giant furnace and gets burnt alive. Hear the child screaming, and then he eventually like pulls out its burned remains. That was so horrible. That was such a hard scene to listen to, but definitely drove home why are people rebelling and why do they have so much pent up violence and anger and want to enact revenge? Well, because things like this happen. So these POVs are constructed and chosen brilliantly and with such purpose. And it just feels like this whole book is a well-oiled but complex machine, like a grandfather clock or something, where all these little gears fit together to tell this larger than life but deeply emotional story. Jonas Clover, that was a random POV. I swear he didn't come until like way later in the book. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really don't remember him at all in the first half. And he doesn't do that much. He's like if Vic was a Northern man and had more of a sense of humor or more of a lighthearted take on things, like still deeply selfish because he's going to do whatever he has to do for his own survival, but kind of has that older dogman wisdom too, where like these kids think they want glory, they think violence will give them that glory, but little do they know that violence begets violence. And it's just leads to people going back to the mud unnecessarily early, and you never think it will happen to you until you're almost back in the mud. He kind of just gave that outsider looking in POV, but for the Northern men. for what all the drama that was going on in the North, which ended up, I will say, my favorite POV chapter of his was the last one he had when he was watching the banquet that was being thrown for Stour Nightfall, the great wolf of the North. And it ended up being a coup against his father and then turning against Clover. And Clover had to make that split-second decision, which he did. He did not let sentimentality keep him, and therefore, caring about someone living or dying, keep him from killing this woman if he had to for his own survival. So like I said, he very much was like Vic with more humor, Vic with more foresight, Vic with more history. So now we're going to talk about the last POV, Leo Dan Brock. And I want to shout out because his first POV chapter, it's a scene with his mom, Finri Dan Brock, and I loved her. And it was crazy because it was like one of the first few chapters, and it's the first POV scene with Leo. And she was just so well done as a character. I could just feel her years of exhaustion and wisdom and frustration of having a son that's this fiery and desperate for glory and to kind of fight his way to the top, and just being like, we have to be strategic, we have to be careful. Such a good, incredible dynamic. And I also liked Leo, even though he's simple and dumb, but he's simple and dumb in a way that's different than Prince Orso. He's a little bit more of a realist. He's not spoiled in the way that Orso was. He did have to fight a ton of battles and lose friends and be in difficult situations and fear for his life and fear for his people and fear for his mother and make hard decisions. Now, is he still a little bit of a dummy? Yes. Ririk says as much, like kind of feeling like he's not the brightest bulb, but he's handsome and he's sexy and he's strong and he's a hero, like undeniably so. Also, of course, very interesting because he would have died if not for Ririk, but of course the party is for him. He knows that that's the case. She knows that that's the case, but of course he doesn't share that glory. He doesn't let the world know, but he can't if he wants to maintain his power and his authority. Then people need to think that he beat the great wolf as the young lion. He can't be the young lion with the help of a twitchy redheaded witch. I also loved his POV of when he and Savine hooked up, and just kind of that sense that he was like scared of her and very intimidated by her. Also, actually, this is kind of coming back to me now, kind of seems a little gay coded. Kind of talks about with Ririk, oh, in a lot of ways she's like a dude, and that's why she's easier to be with. So to me, I think he might be gay, but he can't be gay. And so he's trying to deal with women, and he's really struggling, unless it's Ririk, because she's kind of like bro-y and dude-like, over Savine, who's very, very hyper feminine. Maybe more of that comes out in the later books, or maybe that's just kind of the vibe I got with this one. I don't have too much to say about Leo. I also really liked when he came to the city because he's so used to being in the North and dealing with Glockta, who reminded him that he is a pawn in a great, great, great chessboard, and he is easily controllable and will be controlled and has no power and is not the hero that he thinks he is. And him just being just so frustrated and overwhelmed. But I also found, I guess, after Ririk keeps him from dying from the great wolf in the circle, and yet when he had an opportunity to end the great wolf, he didn't. He stopped, and he had some sort of wisdom, some sort of foresight to want to form an alliance with this man who's done nothing but be incredibly cruel and want to cause war and chaos and destruction. And obviously, we know as an audience is probably not someone to be trusted and probably somebody that he should have killed. But I think the fact that he did that, it was an interesting character choice, and also showed that he's at least a little bit smarter and a little bit more strategic than maybe we first think him to be. Think of him as just the smash and grab pretty boy, but he's a little bit more than that. And there's a little bit more heart to him than that. As much as he seems to, especially in his first chapter, revel in the violence, he somehow had the foresight to be like, violence will begate violence. We can't do this forever. The cycle has to stop sometime. Now, should it have stopped with the Great Wolf? I suspect not, but I'm sure we'll learn more in future books. So the real question then is like between like Orso and Savine, Ririk and Leo, how are all these guys going to end up together? A big piece of this puzzle is how far with the incest thing is Joe Abercrombie willing to go? And the only reason this is even really a question is because of something like Game of Thrones. I'm like, well, Game of Thrones did it, so who knows? Maybe he'll do it. If Orso and Savine are genuinely off the table, would Leo and Savine actually make it together? I can't imagine Savine wanting to deal with Leo long term. Like, at least Orso, while self-deprecating, understood the sophistications of the world and could be self-deprecating in an extremely clever way, where Leo's not clever. Leo's a brute. So it's hard for me to imagine those two being together. I can imagine Ririk and Orso being together. There's something very charming and extremely chaotic about those two, and how it would just drive Orso's mom crazy and just throw such a wrench into probably everyone's plans. So I don't hate that idea. I don't know. There's 2 more books. There's plenty of time for additional characters to be introduced that I don't know about yet. And that is all that I have to say about A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. Huge fan, A++. Thank you so much for sticking around if you did for as long as you did. I know this is kind of a long review. I appreciate you guys. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about this book, how you feel about the series, although please do not put any spoilers for my sake and others. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.